This is the Seiko Speedtimer 1969 reissue solar chronograph. A watch that really got us thinking about what truly makes a great, affordable chronograph. So we thought we'd sit down today to compare it against one of the newest watches to come to the WatchGecko store, the FORZO EnduraTimer chronograph. First off is the sizing. The Seiko comes in at 39mm wide and 45.5mm long, whereas the FORZO comes in at 40mm wide by 47. There's only a millimetre between the size, but actually the two watches wear considerably different. This is mostly due to the tachymeter bezel design on the Seiko, which means that the dial opening of the Seiko is 30.5mm versus a 34.5mm dial opening on the FORZO. The dial opening plays a really crucial role in how the watch wears, and the smaller dial opening on the Seiko definitely gives it a more vintage vibe, even though both of these watches are very vintage focused in their design language. The FORZO definitely wears true to size at 40mm, whereas the Seiko wears more like a 37 to 38mm watch thanks to the tachymeter bezel. Each watch has a tri-compax layout featuring two larger subdials at the 3 and 9 position and a smaller subdial at 6, as well as chamfered baton indices and a fairly simple handset. Both watches also feature a date window between the 4th and 5th hour index, with a round opening halfway between the 4 and 5 indice on the FORZO, and a rectangular opening on the Seiko, which sits more at like the 4:15 mark, as it's closer to the 4th index than the 5th. The Seiko features the solar caliber V192, which has a 6-month power reserve. But since it can be charged by the sun in normal day-to-day activity, the power reserve is kind of unnecessary and really it could run forever until the watch needed servicing. The FORZO also shares a Seiko-derived caliber with the time module VK67 chronograph movement. This is a mecha quartz movement as opposed to just a quartz movement, and so the main difference here is that the Seiko has the charging capabilities, whereas the FORZO has the mechanical module for the chronograph, so you get the mechanical feel of the start, stop and reset pushers, as well as the instant reset on the chronograph. The Seiko features an applied polished logo, which matches to the mirror polish on the hour markers, as well as the high polished look on the subdials that you get from using this solar caliber. Overall, these design details go really well together, and are kind of complemented by this single dome sapphire crystal. The FORZO features slightly more understated indices in the fact that the top of the batons are brushed, whereas the chamfer is polished, and features a mirror polished handset. Both watches have a grainy sandblasted texture to the dial. On the Seiko, I believe this is just a sandblasted texture, as the grain isn't too pronounced, whereas on the FORZO the grain is actually stamped into the dial, and so it's definitely a bit more noticeable. As mentioned earlier, the Seiko features a single dome sapphire crystal, which sits proudly above the bezel, and the FORZO watch features a flat sapphire crystal with a chamfered edge, which also sits above the bezel, so the crystal on both watches helps to protect the case and bezel. Both watches have a water resistance of 100 meters, and the FORZO features a screw-down crown, whereas the Seiko does not. Both watches are also supplied on 3-link stainless steel bracelets, with the Seiko having a more rounded profile than the flat links on the FORZO watch. Including the crystal, the Seiko comes in 13.6mm thick, whereas the FORZO comes in at 12.6mm thick. Looking at the side of the case, the thickness on the FORZO watch is also slightly more masked when you wear it, thanks to the chamfered edges and profiling of the case, whereas the Seiko is more slab-sided, something more similar to like a Tudor Black Bay in design. Thanks to the colored dials mixing with a black tachymeter scale and subdials, these two watches do end up looking very similar. But I think the main difference is definitely with how it wears. The Seiko has a more subdued, smaller vintage aesthetic, whereas the FORZO, with the more polished surfaces and wearing slightly bigger, is definitely a louder watch. Both watches feature a screw-down caseback, with the standard Seiko logo and information on the back of the Seiko, and the FORZO just has the FORZO emblem stamped in, as well as the serial number and other text. Another thing that's different about these two watches is the tapering of the bracelet. The FORZO bracelet tapers by 4mm, whereas the Seiko bracelet tapers by 2mm, and goes down to a buckle with 2 micro adjustments, and release buttons, whereas the FORZO has a lock safety and 6 micro adjustments. The use of the 2 chronograph movements is fairly similar, featuring a jumping seconds, 24-hour subdial, and elapsed chronograph minutes. Another thing that contributes to how this watch wears and looks on the wrist is the end links. So the Seiko has male end links, whereas the FORZO has female end links, which means that the overall lug-to-lug distance on the Seiko is actually enhanced by the strap, whereas the FORZO bracelet bends at the end point of the lugs, so it doesn't add any more visual length. The Seiko watch can be found for around £590 online, and the FORZO watch can be had for £400 online. So 2 fairly similar price points, with the Seiko just being slightly more expensive. Make sure to check out the description below, where we'll leave links to both of these watches, and let us know in the comments which watch you prefer. Thanks for watching. Cheers.